Taxi driver refuses Neymar a ride. What Neymar does next goes viral. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. On a busy city street, Ricardo, a taxi driver, waited for his next fare, scanning the crowd for high-paying, well-dressed customers. He prided himself on choosing his riders carefully, believing that some people simply weren't worth his time. One evening, a man in a hoodie and sneakers approached his taxi, signaling for a ride. Ricardo barely glanced at him before shaking his head dismissively. "Not taking rides right now," he muttered, waving the man away and immediately looking for another passenger. The man, calm and unfazed, simply nodded and stepped aside, not arguing or making a scene. What Ricardo didn't realize was that he had just refused a ride to Neymar Jr., one of the most famous footballers in the world. Moments later, another taxi screeched to a stop. The driver, recognizing Neymar instantly, rushed out, grinning from ear to ear. "Senor Neymar, please, my taxi is yours. It's an honor." As Neymar climbed in, the moment was caught on camera by bystanders, and within hours, the video went viral. Ricardo's shift ended uneventfully. He drove a few businessmen to their high-rise offices, a couple to a fancy restaurant, and some tourists back to their upscale hotel. It was a typical day for him, catering to the kind of clientele he preferred. As he drove home, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. His strategy of selectively choosing passengers had served him well over the years. Why waste time on those who likely couldn't afford a decent tip? Little did he know that his actions that evening were about to come back to haunt him in a big way. Meanwhile, across the city, the story of Neymar's taxi ride was spreading like wildfire. Social media was abuzz with the video of the unassuming star being turned away by one driver and warmly welcomed by another. People were quick to heap praise on the kind driver, whose name was soon revealed to be Miguel. Overnight, he became a local hero, a symbol of the respect and decency that Neymar deserved. On the flip side, Ricardo, though not yet identified, was already being vilified. Comments poured in, condemning the arrogant and judgmental driver who had the nerve to refuse Neymar. As the night wore on, the story only gained traction. News outlets picked it up, celebrities shared it, and soon it had become a global talking point. And through it all, Neymar remained characteristically gracious. When asked about the incident, he simply smiled and said, "It's no big deal. These things happen. I'm just grateful for the kindness of the driver who did pick me up." But for Ricardo, oblivious to the growing storm, the real fallout was yet to come. By the next morning, Ricardo woke up to a nightmare. His phone was buzzing with calls and messages, and when he checked social media, his heart sank. His actions had sparked outrage. His face was everywhere, labeled as the driver who judged a passenger without knowing who he was. "Who does this taxi driver think he is?" read one scathing comment. "The audacity! To think he's too good for Neymar," exclaimed another. Ricardo was stunned. He had no idea the man he'd dismissed was Neymar, but that hardly seemed to matter to the angry masses online. His boss, the owner of the taxi company, was furious. "What were you thinking?" he yelled over the phone. "You've brought shame to our entire company." Ricardo tried to explain, to defend himself, but it was futile. The damage was done. Meanwhile, Miguel, the driver who had given Neymar a ride, was experiencing a very different kind of attention. His small taxi service was suddenly inundated with calls and requests. People wanted to ride with him, to meet the man who had treated Neymar with such kindness. Journalists sought him out for interviews. Local businesses offered him sponsorships. Overnight, Miguel had become a celebrity in his own right. And through it all, he remained humble, echoing Neymar's own words. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted. "I just treated him like I would any other passenger, with respect." Back at Ricardo's taxi stand, things were grim. Customers were canceling rides, choosing other companies. Some even came by just to hurl insults at Ricardo. He was learning, in the harshest way possible, the true cost of his prejudice. As the days went by, the story refused to die down. Neymar's gracious response only fueled the public's admiration for him and their disdain for Ricardo. Ricardo's taxi sat idle for hours. No one wanted to ride with the Neymar snubber, as he had been dubbed by the media. Desperate, Ricardo tried to apologize. He issued a public statement, expressing his regret and asking for forgiveness. But it rang hollow to many. After all, he wasn't apologizing for his prejudice, but for the consequences of getting caught. Meanwhile, Miguel's star continued to rise. He was invited to speak at schools, to share his story and the importance of treating everyone with respect. "You never know who you might be helping," he would say. "Every person deserves kindness, no matter what they look like or what they're wearing." His message resonated with people around the world. In a society often obsessed with status and appearance, Miguel's actions were a reminder of what truly mattered. Even Neymar himself was touched. He reached out to Miguel, thanking him personally for his kindness. In a world where people are often judged by their appearance, Neymar said, "It's refreshing to meet someone who looks beyond that. You're an inspiration, Miguel." As for Ricardo, he was learning a hard lesson. His once thriving taxi business was on the brink of collapse. He had always thought his strategy of selective service was smart. But now, faced with the consequences, he was starting to realize how misguided it had been. Slowly, painfully, Ricardo was beginning to understand that true success isn't about catering to the wealthy or the well-dressed. It's about treating everyone, regardless of their appearance, with dignity and respect. It was a harsh lesson, but one that would change the course of his life. Weeks had passed since the incident, and Ricardo's life had changed drastically. His taxi business had dwindled to almost nothing. He spent most days sitting in his cab, waiting for riders who never came. The shame and regret were constant companions. He replayed that fateful moment over and over in his mind, the casual wave of his hand, the dismissive words. If only he could go back, do things differently. But amidst the darkness, there was a glimmer of hope. Ricardo had begun to realize that this crisis was also an opportunity, a chance to rebuild his life on a new foundation. He started small. Each morning, he would set out in his taxi, but instead of cruising the wealthy neighborhoods, he drove through the areas he had once avoided. He began to see the city through new eyes. Where once he saw only poverty and inconvenience, he now saw community and resilience. Slowly, tentatively, he started picking up passengers from these neighborhoods. At first, they were wary, recognizing him from the news. But Ricardo was determined to show them a different side of himself. He greeted each rider with a smile and a kind word. He listened to their stories, learned about their lives, and bit by bit, he began to earn their trust. One day, he picked up a young man on his way to a job interview. The man was nervous, his hands fidgeting with his tie. In the past, Ricardo would have seen this man as just another fare. But now, he saw an opportunity to help. As he drove, Ricardo shared his own story of the mistake he had made and the lessons he had learned. He encouraged the young man, telling him that everyone deserves a chance, regardless of their background. When they arrived at the interview, the young man thanked Ricardo with tears in his eyes. "I was ready to give up," he said, "but your words gave me courage." That moment stayed with Ricardo. It showed him the power of a kind word, a helping hand, and it strengthened his resolve to keep going, to keep making amends. As Ricardo's new approach to his work began to take hold, something unexpected happened. People started to take notice, not just of his change in attitude, but of his story. It started with a local blogger who had been following the Neymar incident. She wrote a piece about Ricardo's efforts to turn his life around, to learn from his mistakes. The article went viral. People who had once condemned Ricardo now applauded his growth. They saw in him a reflection of their own struggles and aspirations. Soon, other media outlets picked up the story. They interviewed Ricardo, giving him a platform to share his journey. "I thought I had it all figured out," he would say. "I thought success was about catering to a certain type of customer. But I was wrong. Success is about treating everyone with respect, regardless of who they are or what they look like." His words resonated with people around the world. In a society often divided by class and status, Ricardo's story was a reminder of our shared humanity. Even Miguel, The driver, who had once been celebrated as Ricardo's foil, reached out to him. "I'm proud of you," he said. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, and even more to change." The two men met for coffee, sharing their experiences. They discovered they had more in common than they had once thought: a love for their city, a desire to make a difference. Together, they hatched a plan. They would start a new kind of taxi service, one that prioritized service and respect over status and appearance. They pooled their resources, bought a small fleet of cars, and hired a team of drivers who shared their values. And so, the People's Taxi was born. It was a service for everyone, regardless of their background or means. Ricardo and Miguel became partners, both in business and in their mission to spread a message of unity and compassion. A year had passed since the launch of the People's Taxi, and the company was thriving. Ricardo and Miguel had become well-known figures in the city, not just for their business success, but for their commitment to social good. They used a portion of their profits to support local charities and community projects. They offered free rides to job interviews for the unemployed. They became a symbol of what a socially conscious business could achieve. But their influence extended beyond their immediate community. Their story had caught the attention of people around the world, including some very influential figures. One day, they received a call from a representative of the United Nations. The UN was launching a global initiative to promote equality and inclusion, and they wanted Ricardo and Miguel to be ambassadors. It was a humbling moment for the two men. They had started with a simple idea: to treat everyone with respect. And now, that idea was resonating on a global scale. They accepted the invitation, and soon found themselves traveling the world, sharing their story and their vision. They spoke at conferences and schools, met with business leaders and policymakers. Everywhere they went, they spread the message that had come to define their lives: that every person, no matter their station in life, deserves to be treated with dignity. And people listened. Inspired by Ricardo and Miguel's example, other businesses began to adopt their model. The People's Taxi became not just a company, but a movement. Back home, their original taxi company was thriving too. The drivers who had once shunned Ricardo now looked up to him as a leader and a mentor. Ricardo never forgot the lesson he had learned from Neymar: that true greatness is defined by humility and kindness. He made sure to instill those values in every driver who worked for him. And so, what had started as a moment of prejudice and shame had become a catalyst for profound change. Ricardo and Miguel had shown that it's never too late to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. 5 years had passed, and the People's Taxi had become a household name. Ricardo and Miguel's faces smiled from billboards and magazine covers, symbols of a new kind of business leadership. But for all their success, the two men never lost sight of what mattered most: the people they served. Every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night when Ricardo had refused Neymar's fare, they would host a special event. They called it Kindness Day. On Kindness Day, all rides were free, but there was a catch. Each passenger had to pledge to perform an act of kindness for someone else. It was a simple idea, but a powerful one. By turning passengers into participants, Ricardo and Miguel were spreading the spirit of compassion far beyond the confines of their taxis. Stories would pour in from all over the city, of strangers helping strangers, of long-divided neighbors finally coming together. For one day a year, the city was transformed into a community in the truest sense of the word. And at the heart of it all were Ricardo and Miguel, the unlikely duo who had proven that change is always possible, that it's never too late to choose kindness. As the years went by, their impact only grew. They expanded their business to other cities, then other countries. They became not just business leaders, but global advocates for social change. And through it all, they never forgot the man who had inspired them: Neymar. They often told the story of that night, not as a moment of shame, but as a turning point. A reminder that even the smallest actions can have profound consequences. Neymar himself had become a supporter of their cause. He would often speak of them in interviews, praising their work and their vision. What Ricardo and Miguel have achieved, he once said, is a testament to the power of the human spirit. They have shown us that it's not about perfection, but about the willingness to learn and grow. They are true champions on and off the field. For Ricardo and Miguel, those words were the highest praise imaginable, because they knew, deep down, that their greatest achievement wasn't their business success or their global influence. It was the countless lives they had touched, the hearts they had opened, the minds they had changed. It was the proof that, in a world often divided by difference, kindness is the great unifier. And so, as they looked to the future, Ricardo and Miguel knew that their work was far from over. There were always more hearts to touch, more bridges to build. But they faced that future with hope and determination, knowing that they had already made an indelible mark. They had shown the world the true meaning of greatness, and it had nothing to do with fame or fortune. It was about the simple, profound, transformative power of human kindness. That was the lesson of the People's Taxi, and it was a lesson they would spend the rest of their lives sharing. A decade had passed since that fateful night, and the world had changed in ways that once seemed unimaginable. The People's Taxi had become a global phenomenon, a symbol of a new era of business, one driven not just by profit, but by purpose. Ricardo and Miguel, now in their 60s, had become elder statesmen of this new world. They were invited to speak at the United Nations, to advise heads of state and captains of industry. But for all the accolades and influence, they never lost touch with their roots. They still spent time behind the wheel, talking with passengers, listening to their stories. It was on one such ride that they received a surprise visit from an old friend. Neymar, now retired from football but no less a global icon, slid into the back seat of their taxi. "I hope this ride is on the house," he joked, his eyes sparkling with mirth. Ricardo and Miguel could hardly believe it. The man who had inadvertently started it all, here in their cab, after all these years. As they drove, they reminisced about old times, about the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. Neymar listened intently, his admiration for the two men growing with every word. "You know," he said finally, "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately, about what we leave behind." Ricardo and Miguel nodded, understanding. It was a thought that often weighed on their own minds. "And I've come to realize," Neymar continued, "that the greatest legacy isn't in the trophies or the records. It's in the impact we have on others, the way we change lives, inspire dreams." He looked at Ricardo and Miguel, his eyes shining with emotion. "And by that measure," he said, "you two are the greatest of all time. What you've built, what you've achieved. It's a legacy that will endure long after all of us are gone." Ricardo and Miguel were speechless. To hear such words from Neymar, a man they had long admired, it was overwhelming. But more than that, it was a validation, a confirmation that they had chosen the right path, that their work had mattered. As they dropped Neymar off at his destination, he turned to them one last time. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. "The world needs more people like you." And with that, he was gone. But his words lingered, a reminder of the incredible journey that had brought them here. As they drove away, Ricardo and Miguel looked at each other, their eyes misty with emotion. "We did it," Ricardo said softly. "We really did it." Miguel nodded, his hand finding Ricardo's and squeezing it tight. "No, we did it," he said, "together," and that, in the end, was the true lesson of their story. That greatness is not a solo pursuit, but a shared one. That when we lift each other up, when we choose compassion over judgment, there's no limit to what we can achieve. As they drove off into the city, the sun setting behind them, Ricardo and Miguel knew that their journey was far from over. There were always more people to help, more hearts to touch. But they faced that future together, united by a bond that had been forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. A bond of respect, of understanding, of shared humanity. It was the bond that had transformed a moment of prejudice into a movement of kindness. And it was a bond that would endure, as long as there were people willing to open their hearts and see the best in one another. For in the end, that's what the People's Taxi had always been about. Not just a business, but a belief in the transformative power of human connection. A belief that, in a world often divided, kindness is the great unifier. And a belief that, no matter where we come from or what we look like, We all share the same fundamental desire: to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to be treated, in the words of a humble taxi driver and a legendary footballer, with the respect and dignity we all deserve. That was the legacy of Ricardo and Miguel, and it was a legacy that would endure as long as there were people willing to carry it forward. As long as there were people willing to choose, in the face of judgment and division, the simple power of kindness. For in that choice, as Ricardo and Miguel had learned, lies the true measure of greatness. Not in the accolades or the achievements, but in the lives we touch, the hearts we open, the dreams we inspire. In the end, that's what matters most. And that's the lesson that the People's Taxi will carry forward to generations yet to come. A simple lesson, but a profound one. A lesson of hope, of compassion, of the boundless potential of the human spirit. A lesson that began with a chance encounter and ended with a world transformed. The lesson of Ricardo and Miguel. The lesson of the People's Taxi,